Hey everybody, Tim here, episode 42. I'm back like I never left, and I'm back for another week. I'll talk if you'll listen, episode 42, and this is a big one. It seems like every episode, I don't know what episode 50 is going to look like. I don't know what episode 50 is going to sound like. I'm sure I'll try to make it as grand as I can, but this is huge. This episode is going to be huge. I'm really excited about it. Some of the people who are close to me did get an inside scoop on what this episode is going to be about. And if you didn't look at the title, then you may not know. But this episode is focused on our beautiful black women. And I definitely wanted to have a open discussion about a topic that has been nagging a lot of people for decades. And that's putting it lightly. I'm just saying decades only because most of us are listening have barely been around for 30 years, so 3 decades. And this is, of course, preceded us. This has been around before we've been around. But I definitely wanted to key on the opportunity to discuss this, to have an open, productive, receptive, digestible conversation surrounding our black women. So this month is Black Attack. This month, a lot of people have been, in some cases rightfully so, and other cases maybe more than they would like, have been bombarded with, let's just call it for what it is, blackness, right? And I think there are a lot of great things that have come from this month up until this point, and of course, obviously a lot of horrible things, unspeakable things that have come from this month alone. And we're not even a month in to June yet. We're not even, we still got some time before June is done, and it's been a lot. It's been a lot to discuss. It's been a lot to look at. So obviously a lot of things, the catalyst for this was George Floyd, which just overwhelmingly, some of us are quite comfortable, but for others it's very overwhelming level of blackness or level of culture, right? And I think it's only going to result in good things, positivity, because I believe it's going to increase awareness. And we have so much, and with Juneteenth being just a few days away, short days away, 5 days to be specific from at the time of this recording, I thought that this was an appropriate topic. And I think I'm going to close June out with nothing but black topics. All of my episodes and topics so far have been surrounding black culture, black community, and more specifically, the insight of a black man's mind, a young black man's mind. Although my back and knees sometimes disagree with that statement, I am relatively young, I like to think anyway. That said, one of the topics I like to discuss is black women in particular and how they feel unappreciated and their perception of black men and their support. Now, a part of the reason that this conversation is so important to me and this topic is so important to me is because I can't tell you how devastating ignorance is. We talked about that a bit last episode, right? How ignorance can lead to so many different things. Ignorance can lead to fear. Ignorance can lead to hate. Ignorance can lead to destruction. And the only cure for ignorance is education. However, I think if education is the finish line, awareness is the starting point. And we can't get to the finish line unless we start the race in the first place. And I think we got to bring awareness to certain topics. Now, the reason this topic I feel like always gets shot down is it never turns into a productive conversation. Usually what happens when a black woman gets on her pedestal and she says, I feel unsupported, and black men don't support black women. We're in this fight all alone. We don't have the type of support that we give y'all. We bleed for y'all. We die for y'all. We support y'all without question. We love y'all unconditionally. And we don't get that back. Usually what happens is, the men who feel that way, genuinely, the men who don't want to support black women, they're quiet, right? They never come to the discussion, right? You never see them at the dinner table to talk about this. They're quiet. They believe white women are better. They believe Asian women are better. They believe women of other races and cultures are better, legitimately. And you could talk about why they feel that way. But they legitimately feel that they're better. So they never take a seat at the table to have a discussion because they like, yeah, what's your point? You know. But there's two other groups of men out there. There are groups of men who maybe, okay, like, I don't think this to be true, but I want to know why you feel that way. I want to understand and listen, and I want to get to the point where I understand where you're coming from and digest it and comprehend it. And then you got that other group of guys that are like, no, you absolutely are right. You're 100% right. You aren't supportive. You aren't supported. We aren't being supportive. And we need to uplift you and put you on the pedestal that you deserve to be on in some cases. So tell me how. And I think what happens is, unfortunately, you have women out here who may be very articulate and can express these thoughts, but it falls on deaf ears and men become defensive and we go, well, that's not me, so it's not happening. And the conversation just shuts down, right? Or what happens is you'll get a lot of black women who are just tired. They're frustrated. They're upset. They're fatigued in every sense of the word. Or they're just not articulate. Let's call it what it is. You all have been listening long enough to know that I'm not going to sugarcoat this. A lot of people out there, and since we're talking about black women in particular, some black women, you can put a percentage on it in your own time. That's not what this is about. But some black women just can't articulate that. So what will happen is, again, you have that first scenario where black men just aren't receptive. They're just like, well, this isn't happening. This is this false narrative, this fake reality that you're making up. And this clearly isn't happening. You live in this world that you just made up, and I don't want to listen. They go, hey, that can't possibly be true because I support black women, so therefore all black men support black women. Or you have scenario B where the black woman just isn't articulate enough or expressive enough to really navigate through those thoughts and emotions and communicate that to a man in a way that he can understand. And what happens is you have this loop of ignorance, I like to call it, right? You have this loop of ignorance where somebody will go, hey, you're not supporting me. Black men don't support black women. And a black man goes, well, how? How is that true? And a black woman goes, you just don't support us. And now that guy goes, okay, I guess I don't, but I don't know how to do it. I guess I just don't support you. And this confusion breeds hate. It breeds envy, in some cases jealousy. And there's a lot of different things out there that really get misconstrued. And I really wanted to bring light to this conversation because I have 2 interviews on. This is unprecedented territory. For anyone who's been listening to the show, this is unprecedented territory because not only do I have 2 young ladies on the phone on an interview later on in the show, you'll hear it. For everyone watching on the Facebook and Instagram lives, you won't get to see this part of it because the interviews are pre-recorded and then they're inserted into the show. So you'll have to listen to hear the full interviews. But I encourage you to listen to the interviews. But I have 2 young ladies, 2 black young ladies, to express their point of views and their message in general. And I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but their message is the same, but their delivery is very different. And I wanted their delivery to really, and this was without prompting, that's just who they are and their personalities. Their delivery is very different. And one person's delivery is very passionate, very in your face, and very shut up and listen. And I think that's important to manifest because I think she does a good job of representing the young ladies and the women out there, black women out there, who are just tired. They're tired, they're frustrated, and they just that passion just overflows. The other interview, the young lady is a bit calmer in her approach, but she does a very good job, a methodical operation of dissecting the who, what, where, whens, and whys. And I think it'd be hard pressed for someone to walk away from this episode in particular and not see that argument and not see that point of view. And on one side of it, you can always say like, hey, this is a perception. You can say that it's fact. You can say it's an emotional response. You can say that it's an irrational response. You can say it's a logical, historical response. Regardless of what adjective or what words you decide to use to describe this feeling, one thing that you got to deal with is that it's there. There's an example that I used earlier in one of the interviews after the interview had ended, where I talked about how some people feel like they can't express these things because of other areas of interest. And I used the example of someone falling down and scraping their knee. If someone falls down, let's take a 6-year-old, 4-year-old, 3-year-old child falls down and scrapes their knee. In that moment, that is the worst pain that they ever felt in their life. That is the worst pain they've ever felt. Now, by not acknowledging that and say, hey, pick yourself up, rub some dirt in it, and walk away. There's kids in Africa starving. There's people in Haiti or Puerto Rico who will never have a home again because of the natural disasters or otherwise artificial disasters that occurred in their place of birth or where they live. There's people in the Middle East who had their brother, their sister, their child, their mother, their father taken away from them due to civil war. You have people in the Holocaust or people who endured slavery their lives will never, their ancestors' lives will forever change because of these moments. So get up, pick yourself off the ground, rub some dirt in it, and keep walking. That's like saying you don't have the right to be hurt. You don't have the right to feel pain because these other traumatic things happen. These other horrible things happen. And you automatically invalidate that person's feelings. And I encourage for the black women, and more specifically the black men who are listening right now, who feel like, hey, these feelings, I don't know where they're coming from, regardless of where they came from, regardless of how they came to be, and regardless of whether you agree with it or not, the stance or not, one thing that you have to deal with is that it's there. And I think these two young ladies later on in the show do a really good job of expressing their thoughts in certain areas and hopefully give insight into the line of thinking. And again, if you walk away from this show still in denial, I think at that point that's willful ignorance, and you're comfortable with being ignorant instead of having a productive conversation. You're comfortable being where you're at and you don't want to grow. And that's your right. But I think shame on you if you don't want to at least have the discussion. For a lot of people, and I talk about this a little bit in an interview, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but for a lot of people, you have unwillful ignorance, right? You don't know about how long that roof will last on that home. You don't know about HOH fees when you buy a house. You don't know what left wing and right wing means when it comes to politics. You don't know what Juneteenth is. And ignorance to a degree is okay until you get to the point where you become aware of it, that it's a thing, and you educate yourself on that thing. And there are going to be certain people out there, specifically this month, there are a lot of angry black folk out there who they don't want to have a discussion, an open-minded discussion with anyone who's not black, specifically white people, because they feel frustrated. They're tired. I think no one's going to say this, but I'm comfortable enough with saying this. I know how it is. I think some of them are too lazy to try to articulate their thoughts and feelings, so they just fall back on violence and irrational behavior. But in general, you're going to find a lot of people who are just tired of talking. They're tired of voicing their opinion. They're tired of bearing this burden of racial inequality, and they lash out in a certain way. But there's also a group of people, and I like to think I'm one of them, who they sit down, they're willing to have a productive dialogue, and they seek to understand. And they respond. They listen to understand. They respond to understand. They don't listen to just respond. And I think this is really important. I think, fellas, on this one, we just kind of got to shut up and listen. And I'm gonna be perfectly honest. Perfectly honest. There are a lot of viewpoints that were said on both of the calls that I don't necessarily agree with. Now, you can argue that I disagree because of a state of ignorance. You can say that I disagree due to a state of exposure. You can say I disagree due to my age and me being ignorant to like historical facts and historical things that have taken place. However, the reality of it is there's certain things that I disagree with. And I think that there's a lot of anecdotal arguments being made, and it's tough to counter those points with like a solution. But regardless of how I feel, I think, fellas, we just got to shut up and listen, hear what they're saying, and at least attempt to unpack and peel back the layers of the onion and see how we can help them get to a place of comfort, right? In order to help any group of people overcome challenges or barriers that a specific group of people have placed in another group of people's way, you'll need help from that opposing force in some capacity. If you want to fight misogyny, you need the help of men. If you want to fight racial inequality, you need the help of white people. You just do. Even if that's the very same thing that you're fighting against. Because keep in mind, we're not fighting against a person, we're fighting against an idea. And when we sit down and we listen to our black women speak and cry and yell and all these different things, we need to understand that they're frustrated, they're angry, and they're upset, and they're tired of an idea. I know it's really easy for us to want to react and get defensive, but honestly, when you understand that the idea is being attacked and not the person, you can become a little bit more receptive. You can kind of like sit down and unpack what's being said. So there's a lot of things that I want to get to. I can't wait for you all to hear those interviews later on in the show. And speaking of ignorance, I also want to talk about Juneteenth and why it's so important to some people and why it should be important to everybody in this country and in some cases across the world. But before I do that, I want to check up on my Instagram and Facebook followers. The chats have been going pretty crazy, so I do want to see what they had to say about this. And I'll be back in just a moment. Hey everybody, I'm back. I really would like everybody to join in on the discussion. I have a lot of friends who hit me up personally, Charles being one of them. Of course, my girlfriend, definitely very engaged. And after they listened to the show, they talked to me about it, and I value those conversations. But there's nothing like being in the moment. So if you find yourself following me on Instagram, if you find yourself following a friend of mine on Facebook, looks like I made a habit out of this, and I've been recording these Sunday nights. So feel free to jump in and participate. I would love to get some of your thoughts. And because I give myself time to take breaks in between segments, who knows, maybe some of your thoughts will maybe even find their way onto the show. Just like a good friend of mine, Jacob. Now, you all should know Jacob. Jacob has been on the show before. And when I posed a question on Twitter, again, I do have a Twitter account. I put a lot of my random thoughts that I'm thinking about for the show. I put that on Twitter, and I give everyone an opportunity to respond. And I'm not this big name guy, so of course sometimes the thoughts get lost in the abyss of the timeline, and you may never see them. But every now and again, I get a nice little nugget from somebody. And my buddy Jacob, he said some black women feel this way because they have been given poor examples, where instead of looking at black men as a whole, they look at individual examples. And if they have that black man who cheats on them, or if they have that black man who chose to be in an interracial couple, in an interracial relationship for a perceived better reason, or that black man not flying to their relief and defending them in certain circumstances in this battleground that we call life, they deem all black men unsupportive because of those examples. And I think that's a very legitimate statement. And I want to be really clear. There are a lot of black women, and in particular, the two young ladies that I had on that might disagree with that point of view. But I think it's really important. And just like we want to validate our black women in the way that they feel and address this feeling of being unsupported, we need to also bring to light Jacob's comment. We also need to bring to light that Jacob is coming from a legitimate place in where he say, hey, they've been given poor examples. And although I don't think that's the case for every woman, I think both of the callers that you'll hear later on in the show did a good job of expressing that that's not the case for every woman, where it's just, hey, this specific guy, they bring other issues to the forefront. But I think Jacob's response is very valid and very legitimate. That I do think there are some young ladies, let's call it a subcategory, if you will. There are some young ladies who feel like, okay, so the broad category is black men don't support black women, right? And I think one of the subcategories is a black woman a woman of color, a woman who's black or brown, had a poor relationship or poor experience. And because of that, it's really easy for them to hop on the bandwagon and say, yeah, you know what, you're right. Black men don't support black women. And I think they'll get the support of their black women, their fellow black women or women of color, because sometimes you don't really care about why somebody feels a certain way as long as you know that they feel the way that you do. And you kind of embrace them, you have them on your team. I don't care why you like the Eagles. I'm an Eagles fan, so we're on the same side type of thing. And it kind of goes from there. So I think a lot of these, again, sliver of a category, this subcategory of women who have been done wrong, whether it was in part due to the decisions that they made, or they were on the unfortunate end of a lot of other scenarios where their man cheated on them, or their man stepped outside of the bounds of the boundaries of their relationship, whether it had been a domestic violence situation, whether it had been a legal situation. It could be child support. It could be just supporting in other areas. It could be being a stay-at-home dad while she goes out and pursues her dreams and her goals. It could be being comfortable with the fact that she's the breadwinner in the household. It could be so many different reasons, but I think sometimes when you hear that somebody, again, you hear somebody is on the same side of the fence that you are, you don't really care why they're on that fence. You just look at it as another ally. But I think Jacob's comment was very legitimate. Now, to the other areas where you hear that black women don't feel like they have the support of black men, I encourage you all to sit down and just ask why and just listen. We have twice as many ears as we do a mouth, and we really need to use that to our advantage and just sit down and listen and get where they're coming from. Because if we can help that one black woman who got cheated on, who feels that way, understand like, hey, maybe black men don't support you, but it's not for that one particular reason. That guy was just unfaithful. And you can't brand a whole category of men. Just like men shouldn't, say, hey, I'm going to run and date white women now because of that one black woman I got into an argument with. All black women are this way. I think us as a community, let's not talk about white folk at this point. Let's not talk about old folk at this point. Let's not talk about young folk or suburban folk or southern folk. Let's talk about black folk as a whole, from sea to shining sea, right? I think sometimes we do a really, really poor job of reciprocating or I think that's right. Reciprocating what the expectation that we set is. And hey, Tim, what do you mean? What does that sound like? So I think that sometimes on this side of the argument, and maybe I shouldn't use argument, I'll say point of view. From the woman's point of view, sometimes, and again, we're still talking about that slither, that subcategory of women who maybe had a poor experience with a black man, so they put this label on all of black men, right? You have that woman, that point of view, where we go, hey, all men are this way because of the 2 or 3, or heck, call it for what it is, the 10 I've dealt with, all black men are this way. I don't think that is a productive place to be in or a productive statement to make, because how can you make a statement like that, especially if it's associated with a negative one, and not expect a reactive reaction, not expect men to get defensive? On the flip side of that, men, because you dealt with one woman who's maybe sexually confident and is very confident about her sexuality and open about her sexuality and is comfortable with that, or that one woman who cheated on you, or that one woman who robs you blind on certain things that you had. That's 2, 3, 4, again, call it for what it is, 10 examples. That's not every woman. That's not every black woman. Okay, maybe you dare argue every day and night with that one black woman. That's not every black woman. So I think we both, on both sides of the argument, both sides of the grass here, we both need to take a step back and listen to the other side. For the black women who don't feel supported by black men because of specific experiences in their lives, they need to be heard, and they need black men, to sit down and listen to them and help them navigate through these thoughts, so they can go and help the women who see the true problem or see the bigger picture. And the black men who feel like, hey, white women are better, or hey, Asian women are better, or et cetera, they need to be heard out too. And I know that requires a lot of patience. I know that requires a lot of tolerance. Black women, I'm talking to you specifically. I know it does. And I know it hurts to hear. But I encourage you to sit down, if you have the patience to, sit down, listen to that guy, listen to that brother, hear him out, because you might gain insight into something that you didn't otherwise know was there, and you could potentially help him navigate his thoughts and feelings and emotions in that particular area. Before we talk a little bit more about this, I do want to get into Juneteenth. Juneteenth is a very powerful day for anybody that identifies as a person of color, because it marked the day that slaves were free in America. And I'm going to be honest, earlier in the episode we talked about being ignorant. Earlier, and even in parts of last episode, we talked about being ignorant and being aware. So to give you a real life example of that, and a personal example of that, I had an experience where I heard about Juneteenth for the first time as an adult, and I remained ignorant. I didn't really know what it was. I didn't really care because I'm like, hey, it doesn't impact me. Do I get off? Do I get PTO? No. Okay, I'm not worried about it. And I kind of just kept it moving. And now it's incumbent on me to educate myself on what Juneteenth was. So I did. I took a step back. I educated myself a bit on what it was. And I would like to share this space, this opportunity for anyone, black, white, or otherwise, who don't know what Juneteenth is, what it means to most people, and where we are right now as a country with it. I do want to sit back and talk about it a little bit. So just bear with me here while I bring up the webpage, because there's certain facts that I didn't know that I did want to bring to the forefront. So again, what Juneteenth is. So Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and one of the amendments after the Civil War, the 13th Amendment, pretty much on paper anyway, abolished slavery. And of course, we were still dealing with things like the Civil War. There were certain Southern, Confederate states who didn't like that. And in fact, for my legal nerds out there, one would even argue that it didn't even really apply to the Confederate states because they didn't deem themselves as a part of the country at the time. So it only really applied to, I think it was 11? Was it 11? I want to say it was 11 Union states at the time. So just a little history there for everybody out there. And when Juneteenth came around 2 years after the proclamation was signed, it pretty much marked freedom officially, freedom for everybody. The last state, which I believe was Texas. Anyone listening right now can fact check me on that. But I believe Texas was the last state to go, oh, we're late to the party on this, our bad. And they finally kind of picked up the ball and started to join the team and get with the rest of the festivities, so to speak. And June 19th, 1865, blacks on paper, and beyond were free. Now, there were obviously a lot of people don't accept that because for the people who are racist and view black people as lesser, I think they look at that as a black spot. Pun obviously intended. Pun always intended. A black spot in history. And I think other people look at it like, hey, I can't really be happy about Juneteenth because of all of the injustices and uncivil activities that occurred since then. But I think the vast majority of people, sometimes when you want to get to the top of a mountain, you have to be as proud of the first step as you are the last one. And yeah, when you take that first step, you might not be where you want to be, but each step is as important as the other. Each step that you take is as important as the one before it, and will be as important as the one after it, because no journey is done mid-step, right? The journey is only done when you get to the top of the mountain. And I think a lot of black people who are listening right now, or just black people in general, would be the first to say that we ain't done yet. We ain't finished. We got a lot more to see change before we feel like we're a part of this country, right? Even when they were signing the Declaration of Independence, You could even argue that, hey, slavery was never explicitly mentioned in the U.S. Constitution or like the Declaration of Independence. Like that was never explicitly mentioned in any area, I don't believe. So arguably, when these white men were sitting down coming up with these thoughts and these maxims, they weren't thinking about black people, because in their mind they didn't regard black people as human. They regarded them as property or as animals, et cetera, et cetera. So you can even argue that, like, hey, this country was founded on our backs, but it's not for us at all. You can, and I think you would have a legitimate argument. But moving back on over to Juneteenth, that's pretty much what it is. That's what it stands for. And just to kind of give you a brief timeline here, so there were other anniversaries for celebrating the emancipation, including the following. September 22nd was the day that Lincoln issued his preliminary Emancipation Proclamation order in 1862. January 1st was the day it took effect in 1863. So the following year, less than 6 months later. January 31st, the date the 13th Amendment passed in Congress in 1865, officially abolishing the institution of slavery. Now, for my history and political nerds out there, my law nerds out there, that only applied in Congress. In the Senate, the House was like, no. It took a little bit for the House to kind of get on board, so it still didn't really go anywhere. Until more happened since then. So you got December 6th, the day the 13th Amendment was ratified that year. April 3rd, the day Richmond, Virginia fell. And for those of you who don't know, Richmond, Virginia was the Confederate capital. April 9th, the day General Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at, I'm going to butcher this city, Appomattox, Virginia. April 16th, the day slavery was abolished in the nation's capital in 1862. July 4th, America's first Independence Day, some 77 years before the President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. So there are a lot of different dates here that I'm looking at, and I encourage you all I did was Google search Juneteenth. So I encourage everybody to go and do that. That's all I did. So definitely go and search Juneteenth. The 13th Amendment basically said that, and I'm paraphrasing it here, again, you can Google search 13th Amendment. But the 13th Amendment basically said that slavery was illegal. There was no, I believe Thomas Jefferson, I want to say it was, in 1807 abolished the importation of slavery, but he didn't make it illegal in the country. So slaves, legally anyway, it still happened, but slaves legally in 1807 couldn't be imported into the continental U.S. But there was no like laws against like slavery until the 13th Amendment was passed. So that's why that amendment is so important. I still think it's crazy that we needed a law. Like there were still people who would like morally said that slavery was wrong, but at the same time they're like, hey, it's good for capitalism, it's good for business. But I still think it's crazy to me that like a law had to be passed for someone who breathes the same air as you do to be considered human. That's so weird to me. Like weird to the point where like I can't comprehend it. Like I don't like I understand it, but I can't comprehend it in my mind that like I have to like make a law. That's crazy to me. That's crazy to me. But we could talk all day about that. And finally, Pennsylvania became the last state. I forget which day it was. I'm sure I could look it up. But Pennsylvania became the last state that recognized Juneteenth as a statewide holiday. So Juneteenth is a statewide holiday. But unfortunately, we still have 4 states that don't recognize Juneteenth as a holiday. We have Hawaii, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Montana, which I'm going to be really, really honest with you all. I expected several southern states to be in that list. And to see basically they're all Midwestern states save Hawaii. I was very surprised. I'm surprised that states like South Carolina, states like Texas, states like Louisiana, states like Mississippi beat Pennsylvania to the punch. Now, Pennsylvania is an extremely racist state in certain areas. However, I'm very surprised that those states. I'm surprised that when I looked that up, I didn't see any southern states on that list. I was really, really surprised. But hopefully, those other 4 states get on a bandwagon, and it becomes a nationally recognized holiday. And I think the more businesses that get behind it, especially businesses that are notoriously closed on holidays, we're talking car dealerships, we're talking banks, we're talking other places of business that for some reason escape me at the moment. But these places closed as in recognize of Juneteenth. I think that'd be a step forward. I think it'll be a step in the right direction. And I think it'll also be that awareness thing that I was talking about. I think it'll be that awareness. Take that white person who has no reason to know what Juneteenth means, and take that black person who maybe heard about Juneteenth from their peers or family but never really looked at it, and they go to their local, Best Buy, they go to their local Rita's Water Ice for everyone in the Philadelphia area, or they go to their local Red Lobster or whatever the case may be, and it says, hey, we have reduced hours or we're closed due to Juneteenth. It might make some people mad, but I think there'll be a group of people to go, Juneteenth, what is that? Or Juneteenth, I heard about that. Let me go look it up. And now you got a new group of people who understand what Juneteenth is and what the significance is. So I think it's just a step in the right direction. I think everybody should get on board with that. And it's one thing to declare it a national holiday. It's another thing for businesses to actually start recognizing that. And I think that'll be the right place to go, like the step in the right direction. That said, I'm really excited to get everybody to these interviews. I can't wait for everybody to hear them. So I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to check up on my Instagram and Facebook viewers, and I'll be back to introduce you to the interviews in just a moment. Hey everybody, I'm back, and I appreciate your patience while I check up on everybody. And that everybody could also be you. So if you're listening, if you're free Sunday nights, come check me out on Instagram Live, on Facebook Live if you're a friend. I'd really appreciate it. And a special shout out to the people, white, black, Asian, otherwise, who have stuck around up until this point. I think it's really easy to check out, right? I think it's really easy to go, hey, this is not about something that involves me, and you check out. There are some things that my girlfriend talks about that I'm really interested in, and I stick around, I listen, and I have feedback. And there are other things that she talks about that I'm not so interested in, and I kind of check out mentally, right? And it becomes a task to kind of stick around. And I think that's the case for anybody. So for you, those Asian women, for those black men who think that this isn't a problem, for those Hispanic men, to those white men or white women who goes, hey, this isn't about me, this doesn't involve me, I'm going to check out and end the episode. I really appreciate you wanting to stick around and gain a little bit of insight into the black community and a little bit of insight into the black man's mind. I think it's very fortunate, although it's understandable, and this is not me shunning or criticizing the people who are fed up at all, but I think you'll get a lot of people out here who are fed up and they don't want to sit down and have an open dialogue with someone who doesn't look like them. But I like to think that I am creating an opportunity for open dialogue, and I will sit here as, even if you were a lot of people are not going to like this, but again, even if you're on the extreme end of the spectrum and you don't want to see where we're coming from, I'm still a person that's willing to sit down and have an open dialogue, because again, I think the cure for ignorance is education, and you can't get the education without awareness. So speaking of awareness, these two young ladies are extremely aware, and I can't even find the words to describe how awesome these two young ladies are. And coincidentally, they both have the same name. They both have the same first name and last name. I'm not going to say what the last name is. I'm not going to put their governments out there. But they both have the same name, which is crazy to me. And this first young lady, her name is Jaleesa. The second young lady's name is Jaleesa as well. But this first young lady, we'll call her the first Jaleesa, that we interviewed today, or that I interviewed today, is a very passionate individual. She's a very articulate individual, and she expresses her thoughts and her emotion, emphasis on emotion. At one point, and I kept it to myself. I didn't say anything, and I know when she listens to this part of the show, she's probably going to laugh. But there's one part of the interview I said to myself, "Geez, like calm down," like. But like I said, guys, I shut up. I listened, and I heard what she had to say. She's very passionate. She's very educated, and she's very beautiful. Here is Jaleesa.
Hey everybody, I'm really excited to have Jaleesa back on the show. For those of you who heard our previous interview involving the Black church, Jaleesa and I have known each other for quite some time. And I like to think that we're pretty damn good at conversationalists. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Thanks for coming back on, Jaleesa. How are you?
Thanks. I'm good. I'm sending this hot car for you. I support you. It's hot. It's hot. Good. I'm excited to get into this discussion because, like, these are as you know, but these are the type of conversations that I have with Tim, just regular life, like not for the show, not for anything, just to hear the opinion of somebody whose merit and character I value, even though we don't always agree. Well, most of the time we don't agree. But I just like to hear that counter perspective and that counter opinion, because even if I still don't agree, I like to know what the other side is thinking.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I think you made some really key points there. And another reason I'm excited for this conversation is, to your point about what you just said, is you are a woman, and you are specifically a Black woman. I'm not a woman at all. No, nowhere near it. So it'd be one thing to have a bunch of guys who maybe don't feel a certain way about a certain topic on the show, interviewing them. You're getting perspectives from like-minded or similar-minded people. I think it's really important to diversify the interviewee group and go from there. But more importantly, another reason I'm so happy outside of just talking to you is, for whatever reason, in my experience, a lot of women who I've offered, extended an invitation to be onto the show, whether personally or through a friend, they always seem to shy away. And we can go down a rabbit hole on why that might be, but I know you won't back down from anything, especially conversation. And I'm really happy to have you on. So just to get into the meat and potatoes, the topic in general for those of everybody listening is there are certain groups of Black women in particular who feel like they don't have the support of Black men. They feel unsupportive, and a lot of the conversations that I've seen aren't really productive. It usually starts with a woman making a statement, Black young lady making a statement, and a bunch of guys responding to like, "Hey, that's not me. I'm not like that. That's not me. That's not true." And I think the conversation becomes anecdotal. And I think on one end, the woman is making this broad general statement, and on the other end, the men are getting defensive because they feel like, "Hey, I don't fall into that category." But I think there's a group of men out there who maybe do feel that way, that maybe do like, "Hey, she's not lying. That Black woman is unsupported." Or maybe there's a group of men out there that's like, "Hey, all right, we got this conversation started. You told me I'm unsupportive. How?" Because the conversation never goes that way. So just to start, so first and foremost, the Black women that do feel that way, do you think that's a legitimate claim? Do you think they are unsupported by Black men?
It's absolutely and unfortunately definitely a real claim, and a lot of Black women, whether they speak about it or not, do feel this way. But a lot of it, I think that we shrug off or even brush to the side because we're just that down for our men. Like, we just want to rock with our men. It's so many Black relationships that have experienced so much trauma at the hands of Black men, and we still are not like, well, I prefer this because it's easier, or I prefer this because whatever. And I feel like our Black men just aren't giving us that same energy back. They're like, well, the first sign of trouble with you, I'm just going to go do something else. I'm not willing to endure, and I'm not willing to experience the growing pains of us as a community. Like, we've been through so much, and now we got to work on each other. And it's like, y'all want to quit at the first sign of trouble.
Why do you think that's the perception? So before we get into, examples of that, why do you think that women feel that way?
Well, I want to start with the first thing you said. Well, why do I think that's the perception, or why is that the thing? A lot of a lot of what black people don't understand is that our black men were just as conditioned as we were, that proximity to whiteness is the goal, is the thing to do, is the thing to be. From as young as they could see an ad on TV where it's all white women, or maybe when they get to the age, if they're watching porn and it's only white women or light-skinned girls, like that's the images they were giving every day. So to them, it feels innocent to then grow up and just be like, well, this is what I prefer because this is what I've seen. But what we are begging them to realize is that there's a lot of things in which ways white supremacy has misled us and conditioned our minds to think proximity to whiteness is the goal. But we have to work to change that perception, even not just for ourselves, but the people coming under us that will grow up and love black women. So that's where I think it comes from. And I think black women then have a legitimate reason to feel slighted when they meet a guy or they see black men so easily turn to white women, not excluding men who genuinely fall in love with the spirit and that spirit happens to have white skin, not excluding them, talking specifically about the ones who claim to prefer white men or light-skinned women, because I think it's the same disease, just different stages.
So there's a lot of that I would love to, one day you and I just got to have a whole episode together, because there's a lot of that one statement alone. We could sit down and break down, but just for the sake of the interest of time. So from what I'm hearing, and just let me know if I'm on the same page as you, what I'm hearing is one of the reasons, of course, because there's many, but one of the reasons that black men prefer lighter or fair-skinned or white women is from childhood conditioning. And, when they come across a situation, again, they could be making what they feel is like an innocent choice. There's other black men out there who may feel like, no, I prefer white women because they are better. That's the way they think. Of course, it's an ignorant thought, but that's the way they think. So that's what I'm hearing.
I would say better or easier to navigate life with.
Right. That's the perception. And we could talk for days on whether how flawed the perception is, but the reality of it, regardless of the reason, that's what it is. What I would really like to get into the core of, for all of those men out there who, because again, we're going to have three audiences here. We're going to have the men who say, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Her feelings are invalid. I don't like that. And they're going to, in the discussion, and the discussion immediately becomes one-sided. You have another group of men out there who goes, no, I agree with you. She's right. I don't need to know the reason. All I need to know is that what you're saying is true and we're going to work towards it. But then you have a group of men out there who are having their hands slapped or having the fingers pointed to them, and they don't know what they're doing wrong. So for that last group of men who may be ignorant and they want to pay attention, they want to fix what they don't know is broken, what were some of the things that you feel like women in this category perceive as unsupportive?
Black women historically have been thought of and perceived as difficult. And I challenge people to look beyond what they're labeling difficult and see that we've had to develop a technique to survive and for our men to survive and to survive in households where our men are taken away. So now we're the leaders. So yes, that comes with a hard coding. And just because it takes a few more licks to get to the center doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And it's like y'all are so like, I don't want to say y'all as in it's every black male, but a lot of you, and the impression that you put on society and on black women is that we're not worth that. Like it's too much. Although we have bent over backwards supporting y'all in so many avenues, like literally giving our lives for you, not to say that y'all haven't done the same as some aspects, but on a ratio scale, we've certainly sacrificed a lot more. And it's like y'all will let growing pains of a woman, of learning how to take that burden off your back and allow somebody else to help you handle that, even though you've been doing it since you were born. See, other races of women may not have that burden on them, so of course they don't grow up with that same intensity that y'all call anger, which is really just passion. We're passionate about you, black men. We're passionate about your lives. We're passionate about anything that we choose to speak about, and you let the world say things about us that you know aren't true, because where is it that you run when things get the hardest? And it's back to us, whether that's your mother, whether that's your friend, whether that's your sister, or whether that's to a mate who you bonded with on a level, in a spiritual level, that you may never be able to do with other races. And it's like, we don't get that credit. Y'all see it and y'all may tell us behind closed doors, but y'all never make it public that y'all stand with us and support us. Y'all let people fetishize our bodies and fetishize the lighter women instead of helping us and creating an environment where we feel loved regardless of what we look like. Y'all let that continue. And I understand that y'all can't get rid of it, but y'all sure as hell can stop helping it within our community. Stop saying you prefer women based on skin. Realize that that is a toxic thought. Get to know a woman, regardless of what your instincts are, that you're not attracted to her brown or skin. Get to know her anyway. And you might just see, damn, this is a dope-ass woman. And my prejudice would have kept me from ever knowing her. That's how you fight against it. You teach the children coming up under you, whether that's cousins, nephews, or your son, you teach them the same thing. This is your mother. This is where you come from. And she comes in all shades. If you love her, then you love the rest of them. Period. And if I think we start doing it as a collective, if we stop doing the preferential treatment to lighter or fairer skinned people in our community stuff, I think that is a starting point for us, for y'all to show us the type of support that we're looking for.
I understand that, and I think a part of the reason, well, one good point that I want to key in on before I respond fully is I do agree that there is a perception that lighter equals better. And as a man, I will see here, and I know there may be a group of men out there that are thinking like, oh, Tim, you're copping out, you know, but I'll be very, very transparent and very, very honest with myself that I can remember vividly discussions that I would have with my friends. I'm talking 8 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, before we even knew what a woman's body looked like, really, where we would go after the lighter women first because that was lauded, that was praised, or even in the reaction. I remember one time in specific, and we're both from Philly, so I'm sure you recall it, the West Oak Lane Jazz Fest. Me and my buddies, we would make kind of like almost a game out of it, where we were kids, you know, this is what young boys do. We weren't going for the beautiful culture. We weren't going for the music. We weren't going to support blackness. We were going to get women. You know, that's what we were going because it was a part of a continued chain of that's what you go there to do. You are deemed successful as a man based on your prowess, and you know. So that's what we. And again, that's another topic we could talk about. But anyway. So we went there, and I remember one of the older guys. He was probably about maybe 4 or 5 years older than us, and we all looked up to him. He was the guru. He could, as we would say, bag, quote unquote, get a young lady in his sleep. You know, he was the gold standard. And I remember him coming back saying, yeah, you know, I got this, you know, woman or girl, and she's light skinned. And I remember 3 or 4 of the guys that we were like, oh, like their reaction. And me personally, I was completely ignorant because in my mind, the goal was just get a number, Tim. Like, it doesn't matter where her complexion is, tall, short. Exactly. Like, just get a number. But because I wanted to be a part of the group because of peer pressure and out of fear of looking like an outsider, when they all reacted the way they did, I felt like, oh, I have to react that way too. And now I have to come back and brag that I got a license. So I will sit here and say that I do agree with that thought process that there is a stigma.
That's how prejudice is birthed. It's literally that 100%. Innocent and that lethal.
And it's just like that, just as quick. However, where I'll offer some, and I don't want to say pushback because I definitely don't want this conversation to seem confrontational. I want it to be productive. I will say this. I think women in general have a higher emotional acuity or emotional intelligence than men. And I know that's a broad statement, but generally speaking, I think women can navigate through emotions much better than men can. And again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but we can talk for days about why that is. But I think this conversation, this topic anyway, is an emotional thing. I think when women say that they don't feel validated, they don't feel supported, I think generally speaking, of course, there may be some isolated situations where there are factual arguments, but I think generally speaking, it's a feeling, like an emotional, like, hey, this is how I feel. And I think because men don't operate on that wavelength, they go, well, what do you mean? I feel like a woman would go, hey, this magazine company didn't hire me to have me on the cover of their magazine, and you didn't go up there and defend me to that magazine, so therefore you're not supporting me. But that man goes, you know, I went grocery shopping with you the other day and I carried the bags. That's how simple our minds are. And that's not an insult to the man's mind. Okay. I think part of the reason that this conversation has been so perpetual, so ongoing, and so unproductive is because women are speaking from one conversational spectrum, and men are not receptive to that communication. So it becomes this like bumping heads thing. What do you think men can do better to put themselves in a position to better understand the argument? And what do you think women can do better to help it be more digestible to men?
To be honest, I don't necessarily think or agree that this is an emotional toward logical reasoning. In fact, I think it's similar, not saying that they are one and the same, but I think it's similar to white people who say, well, I'm not racist. So what is racism? Like, it's like you're insinuating. So what does it matter if I'm not doing it? What does it matter if this is the toxic environment that we create for y'all? As long as I'm not doing it. And it's like this self-accountability where it's like you absolve yourself from the participation in it by birthright by saying, well, I'm not doing it. Well, yeah, white standard bias, yeah, you're not doing it, but you're not doing anything to change it either. So you're complicit with it. And so those men who don't identify with the things that we're saying, they feel attacked. They were like, well, I'm not doing it. I feel attacked. And then they start to pick it apart instead of really trying to see that it's not just an emotional hang up. It's a really physical thing. It's a reason why young brown girls grow up never feeling beautiful to our men and instead try to make themselves appear sexy because they say, well, if I can't be beautiful, at least I'll be sexy. And it's so deeply in it, and y'all are just seeing the surface. I feel like that's why you may feel like, oh, it's emotional towards the guy's perspective, which is like, well, I'm doing this, like a physical reaction. But it is physical. It's just that y'all are only seeing the surface level of things. Just like white people who say they aren't racist is only seeing the surface level. Just because you aren't the thing doesn't mean you're not complicit in the thing. And that's what we try to explain to them, but again, another thing like white supremacy, it's more convenient to just deny it. It's more convenient to turn from everything you knew growing up and what you think made you a man and do things totally different. It's more convenient to just stay the same. And so we as human beings, black, white, woman, or man, we do what's convenient. Like we're a product of efficiency. So that's why the conversation doesn't go any further. That's why the conversations are halted. Not because we can't communicate, but to ignore it is more convenient to say, you know what, we have been doing these systems wrong for years. We need to chill with this. And even if I've been doing it and it has established me now, I can teach the people coming under me, like, this ain't the way to go. Love your sisters. Love them first. And that doesn't mean you can't be with white women, but let that white woman know that these are my sisters. You're not going to be with me and disrespect them. And that, like you said, that goes into a whole other conversation of the proximity to whiteness. Like, it's so deep-seated, and we just need a listening ear, first and foremost. Come in there with, yes, you feel the way you feel, but also be willing to hear. Like, we're willing to even hear y'all on this. Like, why y'all think this? What we got to do to prove the opposite? Like, we so willing with y'all, and it's just like, I see for myself and through my sister's eyes that we're just not getting that reciprocated.
I think where a lot of people bump heads at, men and women in particular, bump heads at on this particular topic. And just like I said before the call, just to give the listeners a little behind the scenes, you know, I said, hey, Jaleesa, regardless of our viewpoint on this before, you know, at the end of the call, we can still go have a beer together. That's just who we are and how we are. I don't want to sit here and act like that's an anomaly, but like that's just, we are like that. We can compartmentalize. Yeah. But I will sit here and say, I can say objectively that if we didn't have the type of relationship that we had and I wasn't so comfortable with self, I would be defensive. And
it would be
and I think
it would be polarizing, definitely.
I'm sorry?
I said the conversation would be polarizing. It would just be like no common ground, no trying to see, the other's opinion or anything.
100%. And I think there are a lot of different things, whether it be language. Earlier you mentioned like, hey, I'm not going to try to say y'all, but I think there's so much passion in there. You say it, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with it if it's, you got to look at the heart before you look at the words kind of thing. But I think in general, and you might disagree with this, but I'm offering a different perspective, the male's perspective to the argument. And in general, I think men, whether they feel like they're a part of the problem or not, get extremely defensive. And I think it'd be really easy to sit here and say, screw your feelings, don't be defensive, and man up, because that's a part of the problem in the first place. Men aren't taught to embrace their feelings. But I think another side of that is you shut down because you don't understand, but you're still being held responsible. So take for me, if you will, a walk down memory lane. And I'm not too sure if you have siblings or cousins, but imagine a time where you went out with an older sibling, an older cousin, an older friend. And let's say you stayed out past curfew, or you went a part of the neighborhood you weren't supposed to go in, but you were unaware. In your mind, you're hanging out with your friend, your sibling, your cousin. You come back, you both are in trouble. You both get held accountable for going to that part of town, for visiting that store, for talking to that person that you should have done. Now you're on punishment. Maybe you get a spanking or a whooping, and then you get privileges taken from you because you did this thing. And you couldn't help but one or two scenarios. You're either, one, what did I do wrong? I don't understand. Why can't I go in that part of town? Or B, you're going, I wouldn't have went in that part of town if I knew not to go there. I would just follow in so-and-so. And I think a lot of the reason this conversation, this topic, it becomes unproductive is because men will go, you're saying I don't support you, and you're lumping me into this group of men who don't support you. How don't I support you? And you'll say, it'll be, I guess what I'm saying is, I know it's a dynamic thing and it may not be a list of rules, but the male brain is very receptive to that. If the male hears, hey, when we go out, I want you to hold my hand because it shows people that we're in unity together. Or, hey, when we go out and someone yells at me, even if I'm wrong, I want you to stand up for me and support me. And then maybe when we get in the car, when we get home, you can tell me that I'm wrong. I want you to praise in public and criticize in private. That's what I want you to do. A man is much more receptive to that.
That's like a relationship. You talk about like a spousal relationship.
Just to finish the thought, even in the scenario where it's just like, hey, we're friends. Hey, if you see somebody go up there and they say, hey, all light-skinned women are X, or if they say, hey, all dark-skinned women are Y, I want you, it would mean a lot to me if you stand up and defend me and say, hey, not all women are this way, it's just the women you dealt with, or you chose to deal with, et cetera, et cetera. Now, these are broad examples, and we can get into the argument or discussion of, what type of scenario. But I guess the point, and I don't want it to fall on deaf ears, the point that I want to get across is I feel like a part of the problem is the men that are out there who are either unintentionally disrespecting women, black women, or not supporting black women, or are in a place of ignorance where maybe they're not, but they're just not supporting them. Because you can be supporting and you cannot do nothing but also not be unsupportive. Two things can be true sometimes. I think they kind of get like, I don't want to use the word intimidated, but I think they shy away from the discussion because it's like, I'm going to get held accountable for something I don't know that I'm doing. So what would your response be to that?
I mean, I agree with that. I think that the shying away from the discussion is because, they may feel attacked, or like anybody, not even just male or female, anybody that's confronted with toxic things they do, especially if it's intentional, you don't want to necessarily, you're not always ready to confront that right now, like right at this moment. And because you leave the conversation not ever thinking about it, that moment lasts for so long. So you're always going to feel uncomfortable because you're not even approaching it on your own with your own understanding and your own consciousness of it. So I think that's why they're always uncomfortable. Another reason why they're always uncomfortable is because, like I said before, Black women are passionate, especially about things that concern us. So we're going to approach the topic with receipts and passion and the oomph behind it, and that could be intimidating to anybody, even other Black women. So, but that's the thing that you have to come there with knowing and filter the information through, because that is how we speak. That's who we are. That's who we've had to be. And another reason I think they may be intimidated, because I see a lot of men, they know the problem, they understand the problem, they will work on the problem, but they're just too lazy to do the work. They just, I don't feel like it. And you had the luxury of saying you don't feel like it and then not doing anything because equivalency, like white people, like this world works for them. Like it don't work for us, but it works for them. So they have a privilege of saying, well, I don't know what to tell y'all. Like they have that privilege, and we're telling black men, like, amongst our community, y'all have that privilege to just not really care that much to do anything. So, and I feel like a lot of people just get away with that. Even though they're loving Black children, Black girls, daughters, and loving Black women, they feel like, oh, well, that's enough. That's enough support. Like, at least I got these Black women in my life. Like, what more do y'all want? And it's like you said, speak up in arenas where sexism is going on. Like, root for us to do stuff. Like, all types of ways. We go on and on.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. And just for the sake of time, I don't want to kind of ramble on, because this will be the episode if that goes on. But I think regardless of the side of the point of view we come from, I think one thing we both can agree on is that if a woman or if anybody feels a certain way, there definitely needs to be an opportunity or effort put forth to understanding that and wanting to navigate that a little bit more. And if somebody says they feel a certain way, that's not coming from out of the blue. And unless they're a manipulator, unless they're trying to manipulate somebody and controlling them, in general, when someone says they feel a certain way, they feel, whether it's a physical feeling, they feel hot, they feel hungry, their feet hurt, or if it's an emotional or mental, standpoint, they feel sad, they feel upset, they feel neglected, they feel disappointed. That has an origin, that's somewhere. Even if whether it's a rational origin, a legitimate origin, or an irrational, sometimes you don't have to agree with how it came to be, but you still have to deal with that it is here. It's present and it's in front of you. So that said, Jaleesa, I really appreciate the conversation, and I would love to have you on. One, congratulations on the second time. Visit the second time.
Yes.
Now, no one has been on the show 3 times yet.
Oh, all right. I got goals. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so no one has been on 3 times yet. So will you be a first? Will you make history?
Yes, I definitely will. I'm trying to go for I need to be on every season.
Well, we'll definitely talk offline about what we can do. And for everyone listening, let me know if you really enjoyed this interview. If you love what Jaleesa has to say, then feel free to let me know. Reach out to me, and we can definitely make this a little bit more regular thing. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Hopefully, I can have you on for a 3rd time and many more times to come.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for having me on. I love, I'm a conversationalist, so I love having conversations like these, especially in a forum where we can all discuss or, get feedback on it. So I really appreciate you having me on the show again.
Hey, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that interview. That interview was so fun. I think it was very productive. And I think Jaleesa represents the women who are just tired. They're tired, they're frustrated, they're passionate, and I think she did a good job of capturing that emotion and that passion and that anger and bringing it to the forefront. And if you didn't hear that passion, that emotion in her voice, I will argue that you're just not listening. So go back and listen to it again for a 2nd time, listen to it for a 3rd time, and just hear what she has to say and hear where she's coming from. And there are certain parts in the discussion and the conversation, it wasn't an argument, that I wanted to kind of come back and say, but. And I'm a big fan that in certain areas, if you start your sentence with but, then you weren't listening. I have an aunt who said one time that when you have a conversation with somebody, the moment you say but, in a way, you discount or refute everything that they said beforehand. And I subdued my passion, and I sat back and I listened. And I did give a little pushback. Just because you're a listener doesn't mean you have to be a pushover. I did to give a little pushback on some topics. But I think the goal is to listen to understand and not listen to respond. Our next Jaleesa, she is second in the day, the second Jaleesa I interviewed, but she's the first Jaleesa that I've known. I actually knew her about 2-3 years before the Jaleesa you just heard from. And she's a long-time listener. She's actually the friend that I was speaking about on a couple of episodes ago. And she is big on awareness. She's very pro-black. Again, another beautiful, educated black woman. I was so proud to have 2 educated, proud, strong black women on the show. This is unprecedented territory for me. I was very proud to have them on. So without further ado, here is the next Jaleesa. Sit back and enjoy.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the first interview, and I hope you are enjoying the show so far. And now we have another treat. We have 2 interviews in one episode. I couldn't be more excited, and I guess at this point it's a habit because I have 2 close women friends named Jaleesa. So this time around, we have another Jaleesa that I have on the phone, another one that I've known well over 10 years, and I'm really excited to have you on. Jaleesa, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm excited. I'm really happy. I get excited every time I talk on the phone with you anyway, but I couldn't be more excited to talk about this topic. The reason I wanted to bring this topic up is I think I fall into the category of curiosity, and I always want to bring attention to certain polarizing discussions, especially now more than ever with Juneteenth coming up, with things like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and racism and police brutality at the forefront of everybody's minds right now. I couldn't think of a better time to have a discussion surrounding how within the black community, within the black culture, we view and treat each other, because that's a part of a lot of people's discussions now. And one thing I couldn't help but notice is there's a stigma or a perception, and in some other cases, there's fact that black men, or at least the perception is that black men don't support black women. And a specific group of black women will tell you that that's 100% true, that they don't feel supported by their male counterparts, and they feel like they're in this battle alone. So before we talk about the whys and the hows and everything like that, I wanted to get your thoughts on the perception. Do you think that perception is fair? And if so, why?
Well, I think the perception is, I think black men do support black women. The support isn't equal. It's not equal, and it's not mutual.
Wow.
And that has been proven historically true. It's not really a perception. It's historically true. If anyone has ever seen Coachella when Beyonce was performing, everyone has heard those words uttered by Malcolm X from the 1962 speech of "Who taught you to hate yourself?" And he basically uttered the words of that we're the most neglected. Black women are the most neglected, and we are the most overlooked. He said that in his speech, and he concluded the speech with saying how white men, they defend white women, they even sacrifice themselves for white women, but not in the same way that black men defend us. Even he said that in his 1962 speech. And that's the 1960s, but even when you go back to Sojourner Truth's speech that she made called Ain't I a Woman, she She made that speech at the Women's Rights Convention at Old Stone Church in Ohio, and she delivered that speech in 1851. This was the 1850s. And when you do read that speech, she speaks about experiencing, basically not receiving so much support from black men or men in general, and also receiving not so much support from white women as well. We were kind of stuck in the middle of both movements, if you will. So, with that being said, it's not really a perception. It's historically true, and it's even true to this day. And as far as taking it from the 1800s and the 1900s, we can talk about now when recently we all heard of the story of Terry Crews when he spoke of his story about being sexually assaulted. And there were other men like D.L. Hughley. He kind of came out with comments, and Terry Crews received backlash because he's this big black man. And it's like, how can you allow this to happen to you? How? And black women were like, oh no, like don't do this to him. Don't joke about this. This isn't funny, and anyone can be a victim of sexual assault. Anybody. But then when Gabrielle Union, she spoke up about America's Got Talent, and she stepped up to the plate and talked about there was a lot of sexism and racism on the set. And this was not a new allegation. Nick Cannon said this before as well, which is why he left. The first thing Terry Crews said was that he never experienced that, and America's Got Talent was one of the most diverse workplaces that he's ever worked in. He cannot speak on it because he's not a woman, and we were all looking like, really? Really? It's one of those events. It's one of those incidences where we constantly feel like our victimizations are being demeaned, not only by other people, by other black men as well.
I see. I think that's a really compelling list of examples that you gave, and from women in prominent positions, whether it be something that may seem as little as a show, a network TV, or something as grand as a civil rights activist. You can come up with many different examples where that narrative and that perception and that fact, again, is being broadcasted. I think where a lot of the disconnect comes in is you usually have two specific groups of guys that say, hey, I'm not doing that, so I'm not part of the problem. Or they go, hey, well, what can we do to be better? And I think there's a third group that says, well, your feelings aren't valid. Don't worry about that. We're going to just keep doing what we're doing. Regardless of the male's perspective out there, the reality of it is this is still a thing. This is still a problem. And it needs to be a productive discussion about it. What would you tell those men out there who are curious? Hey, what can I do to be better? What would you tell them to do? What are their criteria? What is their criteria to be more supportive?
Well, I would tell them to be more proactive. Do not wait for us to be sick or to die or our birthdays to tell us that you appreciate us. What we do, especially for black men, if we stick up for them or we sacrifice ourselves, our time, our money, for whatever that is, it would be nice to keep seeing more black men. Tell us not just how beautiful we are, but that they appreciate us. They appreciate us for who we are, what we do, because oftentimes, even in the media, it becomes mainstream whenever anybody targets a black woman based on their looks. And this goes back to, of course, slavery. They would dehumanize black people, but black women and refer us or use references of animal instincts or animalistic features in order to justify slavery. And this never stopped, because even recently, at the beginning of the year, rapper Megan Thee Stallion posted a photo of herself, Blue Ivy, and Beyonce. And it was New Year's, and it was a beautiful photo, and we were like, oh, we love her hair, and this is a beautiful photo. But then a film critic, K. Austin Collins from Vanity Fair, they tweeted, I have a feeling that Jay-Z face dreams are about to really hit Blue Ivy, and I feel sorry for her. Comments like that, those are comments that we face every year. We seem to be the target of physical characteristics. We're constantly being compared to animals, even to this day. The same thing happened to singer Ari Lennox and Tiana Taylor. It was a tweeter, someone on Twitter. They were comparing Ari Lennox and Tiana Taylor to Rottweilers. Why?
Wow.
Why? They constantly made cartoons about Serena Williams, called her an ape. And we're not going to, of course, forget about when Don Imus, he had an MSNBC show, and he was fired, of course, but when he commented on the Rutgers University women's basketball team, he called them nappy-headed hoes. When those comments came out, black women didn't visibly see black men stick up for us and tell them, mind your business. You don't have a right to comment on our hair, our looks, our physical features, what we wear. That is none of your business, none of your concern. At the same time, I also remember Bill O'Reilly. He was watching Maxine Waters make a speech on democracy, and she was doing a very great job. And when they asked him his opinion, he said, I can't hear a word she said because I'm looking at her James Brown wig. What did it have to do with her making her speech? What did that have to do with anything? We are constantly being targets for our physical attributes. Our lips, our body parts, they constantly call Beyonce fat. What does that have to do with her talent, her singing, her songs, when she uplifts women? What does that have to do with anything? So even now, when we do see this make the media outlet, and we're outraged by it, not just because it makes the news that we're being compared to dogs, but we don't see anyone sticking up for us. It's just black women saying how angry they are and how stressed they are. And we're thinking about the little black girl who could be in Chicago, she could be in Detroit, looking at the media and going, I must be ugly, because all they're talking about my heroes for no reason. They're bringing up their looks and comparing them to dogs. Do I look like a dog? And for them to even make those negative comments about a 7-year-old, Blue Ivy, she's 7. And one of the tweeters said that she's going to get plastic surgery like Kylie Jenner. And we're going to have to pretend that she's always looked like that. She's 7. It's shocking how it seems like we're the most outraged. We actually do something about it and implement an apology. Meanwhile, we don't see many black men saying anything about it. It gives the impression to us that black men only are outraged when the problem directly affects them the most.
I see. I think that was extremely well put, and for everybody listening, including myself, it did give a bit of a blueprint on how to be more supportive. And I think that's really important. I can't tell you, and I'm sure I'm going to go at length on, for everyone knows that the interviews are set up before the show is even recorded yet. So I haven't even put the majority of my thoughts on paper yet, but I'm sure I'm going to go at length as to how usually the discussion ends where, hey, you're doing this wrong. Well, tell me how. Well, you're just doing it wrong. And I think you did a really good job of breaking that mold and really saying, hey, well, this is what the expectation is. And for everybody listening, the women out there in particular, I would hope that they use that as a starting point or a blueprint to see that, hey, maybe if the discussion is, if the discussion is articulated this way, it'll be a little bit more clear. And I hope the men listening look at that and go, oh, I hope you have an aha moment. I hope you have, and a realization, an epiphany, if you will, where you go, hey, now I get it. Or at least now I'm starting to get it. And I think for that one, for the sake of discussion, let's say it's a third of the men out there who don't support black women. I hope now those men who were curious, that third of men who are curious, are now better equipped to do so. Now, do you think, say for, again, if you have three, parts of a pie here, we have men doing it intentionally, you have men who aren't doing anything, and they're kind of complicit, and then you have the men who are recognizing it, but they don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. So say for that first category of the guys who are just jerks, and I'm being nice, but let's just say they're jerks and they don't want to fix the problem. Let's focus on the last, let's be productive and focus on the last two. Do you think that they are intentionally being unsupportive? So I want to stick with the example that you gave about how black women in their image are constantly being degraded or being disrespected and are being compared to things that no white woman is being compared to in general. So let's stick with that example. Do you think men are intentionally not speaking up because they're afraid or intimidated? Do you think they're intentionally not speaking up because they have no desire to? They just don't have that urge to jump and support? Or do you think they're not speaking up because they don't see anything wrong? Do you think they're coming from a place of ignorance and they just don't understand what the issue is?
Well, first, I would have to see basically the motivation behind why, if they're not sticking up, the motivation behind it. There are some black men who were black boys. They were raised by mothers or fathers. It depends how you were raised. If you were raised to only compliment a woman on her looks, not on her intelligence, you might not realize that maybe that girl you're competing against academically or for a position in the company, you may not recognize that woman, this is a sign of growth, not defeat. And some boys, they are kind of born into this patriarchy. And the patriarchy is a system of society or a government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. So when you're born into that, you're not taught to compliment a woman on her intelligence, to defend a black woman, to honor her, and we deserve dignity, respect, protection. We are human just like you. If you are not taught that, you are at least likely to practice it or even know how to practice it when the time comes. You would, as a black man, you would have to get used to being uncomfortable when these conversations come up. Even what you're doing with this show, is one of the many solutions. It's very simple. You have to open up the dialogue and not be so quick to react to us. When we say, hey, you're not being very supportive, there's some black men who are quick to react and they're not really listening. They're just waiting to speak. They're waiting to say, that's not true, and we do this and we do that. Are you really listening? Listen to her, and she's going to tell you why she doesn't feel supported. She's going to tell you why. And it's up to that individual person
to be open with themselves and to knock down that patriarchy. It's not serving anyone. It's not serving anyone. It's definitely not serving us. I would tell black men, do what's right, not what's easy. It's easy to be quiet. It's easy to be in a boardroom full of white men and there's one other black girl in the room and they say something racist or sexist about her and you say nothing. It's easy to say nothing, but they would stop. I think it would slow down at least if we had more men stick up for us, especially black men. But when you're quiet, we continue to be the target and we continue to be victimized.
I think that's extremely insightful. And I'd like to think that from both interviews, this one, the one before, and even this topic in general, I'm walking away more educated. I'm walking away more aware. And I think this is one of the very, very few times that awareness is more important than education on this particular topic, because you can seek out education, but you can't seek that out before you become aware. And I think awareness is something that just falls on you. You don't become aware. You don't seek out awareness. It kind of like just happens. An external force comes to you and makes you aware this is the thing. Whether it's that one tweet you saw, whether it's that one woman you saw in the corner crying that time, or whether it's an angry outburst in a meeting at work. That can be our awareness. That can be our signal that, hey, something is going on here. It's as the kids say, deeper than rap. There's something happening here that I need to unravel. So although awareness chooses when to find us, we choose when to find education. And I think that a lot of people who are listening to this will take this as, hey, this is that external force making you aware, like, hey, this is the thing. And I want to create an environment of embracing the conversation, embracing the point of views, and embracing the curiosity, and in some cases, embracing the doubt. And Jaleesa, I think you did a really good job of keeping the conversation very positive and lighthearted in a way that will encourage people who, you know what, maybe that is me. And I think sometimes that's all it takes is if someone has a maybe that is me moment, it can help them go to the next level, and I couldn't be more appreciative. So, Jaleesa, the last thing that I wanted to bring to the forefront, and I'm sorry I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, but you've been a long-time listener of the show. You've been listening for quite some time, and for those of you who don't know, if you listened a few episodes ago when I had that conversation about friendship and being on the phone for 3 hours, that was Jaleesa. That was the person I'm on the phone with right now. And so now you get to finally be on the show. Would you have any word of advice or any insight for anyone out there who may have been in the same boat as you, where they're a long-time listener, but they chose not? They're at a point now where they can't or don't want to call in. What insight or advice would you give them?
I would tell them to remember that, first of all, you are a great interviewer. You have great communication skills, and this is just a platform for us to get our thoughts on the table and to come from, for everyone to share their experiences, our hardships, or anything you want the world to know. Just keep that in mind, that this is more so for education. There's a bigger picture, and I'd love to listen to the show and just hear, okay, like, what are you thinking about? And anyone else who comes on the show, I love a good story anyway. I love the art of storytelling. So just think of it like that. You're telling a story. It's fine. It's okay. It's okay. This is one of those. This isn't a platform where you are going to ask us personal questions. This isn't a platform where it's a media where you get into our business. It's not like that at all. You just want to, in the process of you educating yourself, you just want to educate everybody else, and I think it's a beautiful thing.
Well, that means a lot. Thank you. And it's a huge honor. And I feel like anyone who's been listening for a while, or anyone who knows me personally, know I am being extremely sincere when I say that it's a huge honor to have a listener, a friend, and a woman, a Black woman, on the show, expressing her thoughts, articulating her thoughts, and I couldn't be more excited. I couldn't be happier. So I can't wait to get this out to the masses and for everybody to listen to it. But I appreciate you coming on, Jaleesa. I appreciate a slice of your time, and I can't wait to have you on again for a second time.
I will. I will. I don't mind coming back on, and next time I'll have something to plug. I'll be like, yo, get my mixtape. It's like, no, not mixtape.
That new mixtape's out now.
Datpiff.com is out.
Hey, everyone. Again, I hope you enjoyed those interviews. They were very powerful. I hope you walk away from this more aware. I'm not expecting you to walk away more educated. I'm expecting you to do that on your own. I'm expecting you to walk away more aware. And education starts with awareness. And it's okay to be ignorant. It's never okay to stay ignorant. And I encourage everybody to listen to their interviews multiple times, because the more mature you become, the more self-growth you have, the more opportunity you get to go back, and the story never changes, the plot never changes, but your perspective does. So I encourage you to go back and listen to those interviews. That said, everyone, I am going to put a cap on this show. I always appreciate everyone coming by, and I like to think that these conversations were very productive. They came from a place of curiosity and sincerity, and I encourage everybody to reach out to a Black woman, support them in any way that they know how, and just, again, create that open dialogue. Until the next time, everybody, first and foremost, Black is beautiful. Black women are even more beautiful. And I'll keep talking if you'll listen. Take care.